Good afternoon. Oh, it's usually very quiet in here. You guys are like chatting about. Okay, so good afternoon. As you know, we have two guests today. Neera Tandon is here, and we'll have the FEMA administrator with us here shortly. She's currently in the Oval Office briefing the president, so as soon as she gets out, she'll join us. So a couple of things at the top, and then we'll get going. So in today's bilateral meeting, President Biden and President Chavez of Costa Rica will continue to deepen the strong relationship between our two countries. Costa Rica has been a regional leader. They are a strong democracy with a thriving economy and leading by example on migration management. Costa Rica is an endorsing country on the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection and has led the way in offering protections and legal pathways to vulnerable populations. During their meeting, President Biden and President Chavez will discuss how we can continue to expand and strengthen these legal pathways as an alternative to irregular migration. The two leaders will also discuss how they can continue to work together to strengthen economic ties and build inclusive and resilient economies by developing supply chains and creating good family-sustaining jobs for our people. We'll have a readout after the meeting, as we normally do, but one thing you'll see is an even closer partnership between the two countries coming out of today's bilat. Also today, the Biden-Harris administration is announcing a new package of security assistance for Ukraine to meet Ukraine's critical security and defense needs. It includes additional mine-clearing equipment, missiles for air defense, ammunition for artillery and HIMARS systems, and over 3 million rounds of small arms ammunition. This package will help Ukrainian forces on the battlefield and support its air defenses as Russia continues to launch brutal strikes against the people of Ukraine, including attacks this past week that have taken the lives of innocent Ukrainian civilians. The Kremlin could end this war. They can end it today, anytime, by withdrawing its forces from Ukraine and stopping its brutal attacks. Until it does, the United States and our allies and partners will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Now today, as you've all been reporting and you've heard from us already, we are taking another important step in bringing the President's historic Inflation Reduction Act to life for the American people. This morning, Medicare announced the first 10 drugs selected for price negotiation for the first time ever, which will reduce health care costs for American families and lower the deficit as well. With more on the President's plan, as I mentioned at the top, I'll turn it over to the President's Domestic Policy Advisor, Neera Tandon, who's back a second time in just like less than 2 weeks or something like that. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Corinne. Good afternoon, everyone. Millions of Americans struggle to afford prescription drugs. We understand that. Far too many Americans have to ration prescriptions, cutting a pill in half or taking a lower dose than they need because their drugs are simply too expensive. 1 in 5 seniors struggle to pay for prescription drugs. In fact, Americans pay 2 to 3 times more for prescription drugs than citizens in other developed countries. Meanwhile, pharma has spent hundreds of millions of dollars to stop Medicare from negotiating lower costs. In fact, years ago, they got a special carve-out that prohibited drug negotiation that allowed pharma to charge whatever they can. For decades, we've been talking about giving Medicare the power to negotiate lower drug prices. President Biden actually got it done. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, finally, Medicare will be able to negotiate lower prescription drug costs for seniors and other beneficiaries. This is a historic victory. In fact, over 80% of the public supports giving Medicare the power to negotiate lower prescription drug costs. Today, as Corinne pointed out, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services announced the first 10 drugs selected for Medicare price negotiation. These 10 drugs are taken by 9 million seniors. They cover chronic conditions like cancer, heart disease, arthritis, and diabetes. It can cost up to $14,000 per month. For example, over 500,000 Medicare beneficiaries rely on one of these drugs, Entresto, to treat their heart disease. This drug costs less than $150 in Australia and over $300 here in the U.S. Imbruvica, One of the selected drugs that treats cancer costs $6,000 a month in France. In the United States, it's almost $14,000 a month, more than double. Last year, about 9 million Medicare beneficiaries spent over $3.4 billion in these 10 drugs. An additional 15 drugs will be selected for negotiation each of the next 2 years, and then 20 drugs a year going forward. Allowing Medicare to negotiate lower prices will bring more cost savings to American families. It will give them breathing room and peace of mind. And it will make a real difference for millions of Americans. And with that,
Thank you so much. Okay. Very quickly, you all, as you know, going to hear from the FEMA administrator, who's here with us to my right here. And as you all know, at the President's direction, FEMA has been leading a whole of government effort to prepare and respond to Hurricane Idalia. Yesterday, the President approved an emergency declaration, and since then, hundreds of FEMA personnel have pre-deployed ahead of Idalia making landfall in Florida. And with that, I know that you're coming from the Oval Office.
Thank you very much, Corrine, and good afternoon, everybody. I know it hasn't been very long since I have been up here briefing all of you, but I think that this really is indicative of the pace of the major disasters that we are seeing across the nation. And the reality is we are just now approaching peak hurricane season. In addition to responding to the current storms, as well as other incidents, we have to remain focused on making sure that we are also preparing people across the nation for these types of extreme weather events. I did just come from the Oval Office where I briefed the President on the trajectory of Hurricane Idalia and what the impacts are projected to be. And I want to just give a quick update on the preparations that we are making in preparation for the response in Florida, as well as other states that are in the path of Hurricane Idalia. Yesterday, I had an opportunity to speak with Governor DeSantis. I also had an opportunity to connect with South Carolina Governor McMaster and Georgia Governor Kemp to help understand what their concerns were and to identify any unmet needs that they may foresee. And will remain in close contact with all of them in the hours and the days to come as Hurricane Idalia makes landfall and moves across these states. As the President said to Governor DeSantis in his own conversations yesterday, FEMA and the entire federal family are activated to support the people of Florida. The President also quickly approved an emergency declaration in advance of the storm in Florida, turning on the many tools that are available at my disposal to provide the governor any support or resources he may need in advance of landfall and then after. This allows me to pre-stage people, equipment, and resources in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, and I have done just that. We have pre-positioned different types of resources across all 3 states to include several incident management assistance teams, our urban search and rescue teams, our disaster survivor assistance teams, and they are all ready to pivot to the most impacted areas immediately after the storm passes. We also have warehouses filled with commodities like food, water, blankets, and medical supplies that are ready to rapidly move into the impacted area at the state's request. But we are not in this alone. We have an entire federal family that is postured to support. Our National Response Coordination Center here in Washington, D.C. is fully activated, and this means that there are several hundred staff from across the federal family that are working together to support any requests for federal assistance. We have our partners from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers who are pre-positioned to support any power restoration needs. Health and Human Services is assisting with evacuations from hospitals and assisted living centers. And the Red Cross has 50,000 meals to support the immediate needs as requested and has pre-staged shelter support to supplement the 19 shelters that are already opened by the state. And this is a really important point that I want to talk about next. It's on preparedness. And again, I really ask for all of your help to help me ensure the people in the storm's path get this message. While we are engaged with our states to prepare for the path of this storm, it's critical that the people that are in the path of this storm are also prepared. And I know that the people of Florida are no stranger to storms, and I encourage all Floridians to take this storm seriously. This storm is very strong and is expected to strengthen to a major hurricane by the time it makes landfall due to high surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico. This means heavy winds, high winds, heavy rain, and a forecasted 12-foot storm surge in some of the areas along the western coast. This storm surge, this is one of the highest risk parts of a hurricane and is especially problematic along the west coast of Florida due to the underwater geography. The coastal shelf gets shallow very quickly, which increases the amount of the storm surge, putting more people at risk. Very few people can survive being in the path of major storm surge, and this storm will be deadly if we don't get out of harm's way and take it seriously. So I ask all Floridians to be vigilant and heed the warnings of your local officials. Have a plan to communicate with your family and your loved ones. Charge your cell phones, your batteries, any devices that you may have, and ensure that you are receiving emergency alerts. And most important, please listen to the warnings of local officials. If they tell you to evacuate, please do so immediately. And remember, you don't have to evacuate far. If you are in a storm surge warning area, it could mean just traveling 10 or 20 miles to get out of the most significant impact areas. It does not mean having to travel hundreds of miles to get out of the storm's path. And finally, we are all in this together. I ask that you check on your neighbors, especially those who are older adults, people living with disabilities, or may need additional assistance. But before I close, I want to provide an update on another topic that has been widely reported in recent days and asked by many of you, FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund, which as of this morning has a balance of $3.4 billion. So today, I am directing the implementation of immediate needs funding. This means that FEMA will prioritize available funding for critical response efforts to Idalia, the Maui fires, and any other extreme weather events that may come our way without interruption, while continuing to meet the immediate needs of survivors through the remaining weeks of the fiscal year. I want to repeat, we are prioritizing funding for Idalia, for the Maui fires, and any other extreme weather events that are coming our way without interruption. And I want to stress that while immediate needs funding will ensure we can continue to respond to disasters, it is not a permanent solution. Congress must work with us on the supplemental request that the administration has made on behalf of FEMA. And you are going to hear more from me on that soon. My primary responsibility at FEMA is to ensure that we are always postured to respond to any disaster and to provide the life-saving and life-sustaining support when needed.